Hey guys, welcome back to Final Bell Sports. So today I'm going to be discussing Tony Ferguson and where he goes from here. But first of all, I just want to quickly recap the UFC 249 main event. So basically, Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje, that was the best performance I've ever seen out of Justin Gaethje. I thought that he had a chance in that fight, as I said in my UFC 249 prediction video. But what I thought, and what I believe many people would have thought, is that Justin Gaethje's chance to win would be early, and if it went past the third round, Tony Ferguson would likely take over the fight. Whereas in fact, many people had Justin Gaethje 3 rounds to 1 going into the 5th round before he stopped Tony Ferguson very convincingly, I might add, in the 5th round. So it was very surprising in that respect. Justin Gaethje, I think, looked the best he had ever looked. His boxing looked sharp. He wasn't overcommitting, he didn't panic, he wasn't getting into a war with Tony, he didn't let Tony pressure him, he was landing crisp, sharp shots. That was the best performance by far that I have ever seen from Justin Gaethje. But, having said that, it wasn't the best Tony Ferguson that we've ever seen. I don't think that can be disputed. Tony Ferguson looked slower than usual. Tony Ferguson didn't fight at the same pace as usual. Tony Ferguson was... Now, don't get me wrong, there's always been some vulnerabilities to his striking game. He does leave his chin up in the air a little bit, but that's the most hittable that I've ever seen him perform. I've never seen anyone just tag him like that. Even the Lando Venata fight, like I wouldn't have said he was quite as easy to hit as he was here against Justin Gaethje. So we're now in this situation where Tony Ferguson's lost. The big fight against Khabib is gone, at least for the foreseeable future. So it's going to be Gaethje versus Khabib, and we know that Khabib wants to retire soon. So what we need to examine here, and what I'm going to be examining in this video, is what's next for Tony Ferguson. So I'm going to cover what should be next, and what is most likely going to be next. So, as a very big fan of Tony Ferguson, one of my main concerns, and I'm sure many fans' main concerns about him, off the back of this loss, is his age. So Tony Ferguson is currently 36 years old. Now, he has obviously come out in interviews and said, I'm still getting better. And now, I am not by any means saying that Tony Ferguson is over the hill, or past it, or on the decline, whatever term you want to use for it. However, what I would say is typically at his age, you don't tend to make long title runs. It's quite rare for fighters to make long title runs when they're 37, 36, 37. And when that has happened, it's normally been at the higher weights. Uriah Faber's an exception to that rule, because he keeps himself in phenomenal condition. And you could say the same about Tony Ferguson. But the worry is there because of his style. He does take a fair bit of damage, and a lot of the time that sort of style doesn't always lead to the longest career. So what I would say is that it's quite unlikely if Tony Ferguson gets put to the back of the pile, if he has to start fighting sort of fighters ranked 15 to 10 again, he's probably not going to make it back up there. So what I would implore the UFC to do is to not forget what he's done. That 12-fight winning streak that Tony Ferguson has had is absolutely unprecedented, really. At this division, in the lightweight division, Khabib, I believe, is now on 12 as well, but they're two outrageous MMA fighters. Like, it's kind of like Ronaldo and Messi playing together, having these two around at the same time. So what I hope is that the UFC does not forget about that. What I mean by that is Tony Ferguson should not be taking anything less than a world-class fight right now. He should not be fighting anyone who's outside of a world top 5. And there's a reason why I say that. So Tony Ferguson can obviously fight in 2 divisions. Not many people necessarily bring this up, but he did win the Ultimate Fighter at 170. So potentially he could go up there and make some fights with, I don't know, someone like Jorge Masvidal. I think that would be an excellent option for the UFC. But also, even at lightweight, it would be great if Tony Ferguson deserves a money fight. If Tony Ferguson could get Conor McGregor, That would be incredible. So I think that's what the UFC should be doing. And the reason why I say that is because there's other examples where that's happened. So you look at someone like Dominic Cruz, for example. So he obviously wasn't in the UFC for quite a while because the UFC didn't have a bantamweight division. But he was the champion of the WEC for quite a long time. And he'd gone 12 fights unbeaten, including at bantamweight, including title fights. So that was both WEC and the UFC. Dominic Cruz had gone 12 fights unbeaten. Now, he did eventually lose his title to Cody Garbrandt, as we know. But since then, the only fights that are ever talked about for him are these massive opportunities. And as we've just seen at UFC 249, he gets put straight back in there with Henry Cejudo. And what I would say about this is that no one complained about it. You don't see any hardcore MMA fans complaining about Dominic Cruz getting a title shot. And the reason for that is because Dominic Cruz has paid his dues in the sport. If you go on a 12-fight win streak, you're a world-class fighter, and you should be considered as much until it's proven otherwise. And all I hope is that the UFC keeps that same energy when it comes to Tony Ferguson's career. Because quite honestly, I could see Tony Ferguson having to fight someone like Oliveira, or maybe even Al Iaquinta, and those are quite low-ranked guys that have barely any name value, who would still be really hard fights. You know, I think best case scenario, Ferguson gets matched up with Dustin Poirier, which is still a really hard fight. It's just kind of acknowledged that Poirier is a contender. Poirier's 5 in the world, whereas the other two that I just mentioned, I believe, are 8 and 11 at the moment. But it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC matches Tony up with someone like that. So it's a difficult one, but I think Tony should, as far as his career goes. Now, as a Tony Ferguson fan, I completely understand why he took this fight against Justin Gaethje. He believes it's his identity. He believes that he's a fighter. So he's took the fight because he's a fighter and he believes that he should fight absolutely anyone. You know, I'm completely behind that mentality as a fan. However, if you're advising him, if you're one of Tony Ferguson's team, you should not be advising him to take that fight against Justin Gaethje. It's a horrible decision from a business perspective. So I do think now that he's lost this fight, he needs to be very smart about how he picks his next move. You know, if I was him, I wouldn't be taking anyone that's outside the top 5. Because realistically, I'm not saying Tony Ferguson should just go straight into a title fight. I'm not suggesting that. But I think one dominant win should easily get him back into that position. So say if Khabib beats Gaethje, I think Khabib will get past Gaethje, to be honest. So they probably will want to run the Khabib-McGregor rematch. However, I do think if Ferguson does get a convincing win over, say, a Poirier or an Oliveira, I think he should be thrust straight into the mix. His name should be back into this discussion for a title shot. Because it's outrageous that he had a 12-fight win streak and yet somehow didn't get a title shot. Like, other than the win streak itself, Tony's beaten some phenomenal opponents. He's beaten Rafael dos Anjos, who at the time was a former lightweight champion and was still very, very highly recognised at the time. He was only one fight removed from losing his title. He's beaten Pettis, another former lightweight champion. He's beaten Donald Cerrone, a perennial contender across both lightweight and welterweight divisions. Beat Josh Thompson, a veteran of the fight game, very, very good lightweight. And he's also beaten fighters such as Edson Barbosa and Gleison Tibau, who at the time that Tony beat them, they were very, very highly recognised. So, if I try and conclude this video, what I'm trying to say is I think the UFC could screw Tony over yet again. And I explained in my video, when I said, I made a video of the 5 most unluckiest fighters of all time. And Tony Ferguson at that point was number 3 on my list, but that was before he fought Justin Gaethje. Now that he's lost to Gaethje, if he's given some wild goose chase back to the title, it's going to be very difficult for him at his age to come back and win sort of 4 or 5 fights in order to get back to the title. So, in conclusion to this video then, to wrap it all up, I would just like to see Tony Ferguson do the right thing, because the UFC is not necessarily going to look after his interests. They're going to do what's best for business, and that might be a Conor Khabib rematch, and that might be sending Tony Ferguson back to the undercard, because he should only be taking main event fights, and he should only be fighting people inside the top 5. So I think if you're part of Tony Ferguson's team, that's what I personally believe they should be doing. Use that 12-fight win streak as leverage. The problem that he's got is the UFC will not do certain things. They will not give him Conor McGregor because he's not a big enough fight for the risk that he poses to Conor. I think he would beat Conor, and I think the UFC likely knows that he poses a lot of danger to Conor. So therefore, I don't think Tony Ferguson will ever get the Conor McGregor fight. So I think it's a case of he needs to chase some other people. Maybe call Jorge Masvidal out, because I think that's a real BMF fight. You know, regardless of whatever people think of Nate Diaz, I think Tony versus Masvidal at welterweight, that would be a real BMF fight. So, what I would say, guys, I just hope he doesn't have to go through 4 or 5 people, because I don't necessarily know if he's got the time left in his career to do so. But we will see how things go. And I am picking Khabib to beat Gaethje, so hopefully with one more win, Tony Ferguson can be right back in the mix, and we can finally see that fight that we've been missing for all these years. But guys, as always, thank you very much for watching. I'm always happy to hear your opinions, so please leave a comment in the comment section regarding future videos, regarding your opinion on this. You know, do you believe Tony is the best lightweight in the world? Because I do, I've got to be honest. I still think he's the best lightweight in the world. Ultimately as well, as always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you are already subscribed, please turn on the notification buttons in order to be notified of any further videos. I will be making one regarding Henry Cejudo's inverted commas retirement. Bye for now, guys. Thank you very much. Peace.